I don't know about Garfield, man. This recent iteration of Garfield on the big screen feels very odd. And don't get me wrong, I enjoyed all of the voice performances. I thought Chris Pratt, Sam Jackson, Hannah Waddingham is absolutely great. Ving Rhames is fantastic in this. I think all of the voice acting is very good. I think the animation is zippy and fun. And there was this little kid at the screening that I was at who was having the time of his fucking life. Every time something would happen, this kid was like, ha, 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 ha. And I'm like, wow, I want to be that kid and be able to laugh like that at a movie. But there is nothing about this Garfield that feels like Garfield.
I agree.
Right? Like,
Yeah.
Jim Davis's Garfield, like, even if you watch the original Garfield and Friends cartoon, he is this lazy, solemn, sarcastic. Like, the Garfield in this movie is far too energetic.
I disagree with you with regards to the voice acting. I think everybody else was fine. I didn't like Chris Pratt as Garfield.
Oh, yeah?
And this sort of goes to what you were talking about. I feel like Chris Pratt's Garfield had too much character. He was trying to do too much.
So when I say I like the voice acting, I meant everyone was good, but I don't think you should call this the Garfield movie.
This didn't feel like a Garfield. No, you know what it is? This is what the local distributors want it to be. This is Oyen the movie.
Yes.
You
That's
know?
what it
because,
is.
like you said, it's got none of the Garfield characteristics that we recognize. If you are a kid and have never interacted with Garfield, either in the comic strip or the cartoons that have come before this is just a cute orange cat, because this isn't that Garfield. This isn't Jim Davis's character anymore. The relationships are different. The personalities are different. It feels strange. I was watching this film and I was not having a good time.
I was watching this film and I thought the execution of the film itself was good in that you had a children's adventure. Now, this thing skews very young because it feels like all of these movie makers now want to target the audience that Illumination has. So they want to win over the Trolls audience and the Minions audience and the Despicable Me audience and the Sing audience, because those movies seem to make bank. So forget doing something deep and meaningful like Pixar. Let's just go for the children's adventure. And on that front, I think if you were below 10, this is the movie for you. Like, I think you will have a great time. It's colorful. There are some pretty fun sequences. The jokes appeal to young kids that are below 10. All of that seems to work. However, all of that seems to work if this wasn't a Garfield movie. Garfield. There is a very specific characteristic that makes him different to Heathcliff, even though they're both orange cats.
Oh, shit. This feels more like a Heathcliff movie.
Right?
Yeah. Did the filmmakers get confused?
Were they reading the wrong comics?
It feels like they wrote a Heathcliff movie and then thought, people know Garfield more than they do Heathcliff, so let's just swap the names and be done with it.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
It felt so out of sync. And yeah, and like I said, that young kid in my screening was having the time of his life because he just saw a fat orange cat doing crazy things on screen. I think in that sense, sure, this movie works. And if you are a parent taking your child for 90 minutes of distracting entertainment, then fine.
Yeah.
But we did a video on Instagram where we were talking about how impressed the marketing was for this thing because Garfield has brand awareness. Garfield is known across the globe for being Garfield, so much so that you don't have to put his name on the frickin' poster. But then you make a movie where the main character is nothing like what has been developed over decades. And I find that absolutely baffling.
Unfortunately, this feels like that cash grab that we call all these movies to be. I was having a conversation with someone earlier this week and they were talking about, I don't know why people still want to grab that Minions market. And I just responded very simply. The second Minions made $900 million in the cinema. The first one made $1 billion, right?
Exactly.
So that market is huge and pricey, and there's money for all. However, you can't do it by trying to milk a character that parents know, right? It feels like they don't care, right? It feels like they're trying to target the parents who say, "Oh, I used to read Garfield as a kid. I loved Garfield as a kid. So I'm going to take my children to it." And the parents be disappointed. That's fine because they've already bought the ticket and the kids are enjoying themselves.
I don't think it's even that, dude. I think you're giving them far too much credit. You know what I think this is? I think this is them just targeting tired parents who are desperately looking for something to distract their kids for 90 minutes. I don't think they care what it is. I think they just want that money and they go, look, colorful things on screen. Oh, it just happens to be a brand you might recognize. Because I think if you were discerning as a parent, then you would be looking for something maybe potentially a little deeper. Especially if you had slightly more grown-up kids in the 9, 10, 11, 12 years old. Maybe Inside Out 2 might be something that would teach them something, that they would learn something from. And so you might be considering a movie like that because it's not just mindless distraction.
I know it feels like we're spending a lot of time discussing a movie made for children, but I think it's because we grew up with Garfield.
Correct.
Right? We've seen
I
the
love
cartoons.
Garfield.
I love Garfield.
Dude, that Garfield and Friends cartoon still holds up. Go to YouTube and watch those.
Yeah.
They're so fucking smart.
The reason I started eating lasagnas was because of Garfield.
Same. I didn't know what the fuck lasagna was as a kid.
Yeah,
but I saw
didn't
it on
even know how to pronounce
Garfield.
it because I would read it in print and like, cool.
And
That's
I
what
would just
Garfield
harass
was.
my mom to get me lasagna, not knowing what the hell it was.
Yeah, and it was the best decision I ever made in my life.
Same.
Let's sort of break it down a little bit. Let's sort of discuss why these two fat 40-year-olds are having a problem with the Garfield movie, right? Because I think for me, right off the bat, my biggest thing is that the character doesn't match the character that I know. Even in the trailers, ironically, it felt like Garfield was moving too quickly.
And you're absolutely right, because he doesn't. If anything, he would try to find a way to convince John or Odie to carry him everywhere.
Yes.
Because that is more in line with who this character is. In this one, he talks about that. He talks about how Odie is his little slave and does everything he wants. But actually, Garfield himself does a lot. And I think what would have worked better in this movie, because obviously there's a kind of crime caper involving his dad and the stealing of milk from this massive conglomerate farm, etc., etc. I think what would have worked better if it was Garfield using his lazy but cunning brain. And I say lazy but cunning, meaning he's super lazy, so he's cunning enough to find other people to do exactly what he wants. I think that would have been a very cool way to execute the story.
I mean, it just goes back to character, right? Like the relationship between John and Garfield felt alien. It didn't feel like a John and Garfield relationship. Sure, I guess the argument can be made that this is very early in their relationship, but I disagree because we see him get picked by John as a kitten, and then we cut to Garfield as Garfield. John isn't a willing slave to Garfield. In my reading of it, in all those years ago, it never felt like John was a willing slave. And that was the point, right?
John was always suckered into.
Yeah, Garfield was able to manipulate John into doing these things for him. It wasn't that Garfield had access to a mobile phone and John's credit card and was ordering foods by drone. It was that John would open the door and suddenly there would be 7 delivery orders from 7 different restaurants because Garfield had somehow manipulated John to doing it. That was the point.
I don't think this feels like the Garfield that anybody recognized, because I think any reading of the original comic strip or even watching the original cartoons or any read of Jim Davis's conception of what the character should be is different from what we are seeing on screen. And that I find just very, very confusing. I think it makes for a better movie because that version of Garfield, that sarcastic, lazy, fat orange cat, is not a hero that we always see. Meanwhile, the manic, energetic protagonist just feels like Minions or Despicable Me or any one of those other shows on TV or in the cinema. And so I find that absolutely baffling. I don't know why they did that. And yes, there's a plot to this, but like we summarized in about 10 seconds earlier on, that's pretty much it. It's a father-son tale. It is this idea of coming to terms with who you are and accepting people for their mistakes and all of that stuff, which we get from cartoons all the time. And for me, the execution here was fine, and it would have worked even better if it wasn't a Garfield movie. But when you call it the Garfield movie, I'm expecting something completely different, and this movie just did not deliver.
To be fair, I didn't have the highest hopes for this. I saw the trailer and I immediately recognized that it wasn't for me. But at the same time, I was willing to give it a shot because I knew the character, or I felt like I knew the character. I've read Garfield as a child. I've watched the cartoons. So I feel like I know the character. So I wanted to go see this Garfield go on an adventure, only to then be disappointed because this wasn't the Garfield I know.
For parents out there who want to take their kids to watch this movie, just be warned, it skews very, very young. If you have a child who is a little emotionally and intellectually advanced for their age, this may be too young for them. I think they may be bored, or they may have seen all of this before and it may not be the film for them. But when we say young, we mean young. It's slapstick, it's basic jokes,
It's jokes running for too long because that's the joke.
There's not very much here that's quite clever. Inside Out 2 is out in June. I say wait for that. Hopefully, even from the trailers alone, that looks like it's going to be quite a clever ride. So I think you can skip this one. The Garfield movie is now playing in Malaysian cinemas. Do let us know your thoughts if you've already seen it, especially if you're a fan of Garfield. We're curious to know if you felt the same way as we did. Let us know. You know how to reach out. Goggler MY, all of our social media feeds. You can also email us on podcast@goggler.my or send us a WhatsApp on the Goggler hotline, 012-524-5208. Thank you so much for listening. This is the Goggler Podcast.